Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Hayden, Seth Hayden. You can call me Seth. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all this evening. And many thanks for your interest in this topic. Hopefully, we can be of help to you tonight. And hopefully, some of the information that I provide that you will find direct relevance to your own experience. And so I'm going to share a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to talk about military affiliated career elements for a minute. And then I'm going to get into some things that hopefully are specific that will be helpful in terms of how you can structure your journey and some ways to do that. And then I have some very specific resources at the end that I'm actually going to show you, which hopefully you will find helpful. So that's a little bit of what our time together is going to look like. I do have some questions at the end for us to process our experience. So I hope you will be willing to participate. I will also have the opportunity for you to ask me questions at the end. So given that it's difficult when you're sharing a screen to kind of see who is wanting to say something and so on, it'd just be a little easier to wait until the end where I can stop sharing my screen, get a full sense of who is wanting to engage and go from there. So that's how we're going to be operating this evening. So again, many thanks. Honor to be here at Johns Hopkins. My father went to school in Baltimore, so I've got a little bit of a connection to the area and certainly appreciate the opportunity to connect with you here always, as we've known each other over the years. And so glad to be with you all. So I'm going to share a little bit about myself. Now, one of the things that happens a lot of times when I am in a presentation is I often wonder, who is this person? And what do they have that makes them somebody able to step forward and talk about this topic? And so I thought I would share a little bit about my own experience. So I'm currently an associate professor of counseling at Wake Forest University, which is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So Winston-Salem is known for the home of Krispy Kreme donuts. That's where they started, and Reynolds Tobacco. So I will say that I don't think Winston-Salem is known to contribute to the health of our country, but if you like the creature comforts, Winston-Salem is right up your alley. And so we are a small private liberal arts institution. And so that's Ronaldo Hall that you see there, and that's our symbol, which is pro humanitate. So I think that's important because it shapes a lot of my work. So pro humanitate means for humanity. And so when we're doing our work at Wake Forest, we often continually think about how does this work translate into the real world? And so that's a mission of mine, if you will, is taking my work and hopefully translating it into a way that can be very helpful and accessible for people. Now, prior to my time here at Wake Forest, because I'm more of a faculty member now, and I'll talk a little bit about some things I'm still doing in relation to direct practice, but I was the program director of career advising and counseling at Florida State University, which is a large state institution in Tallahassee, Florida, and I worked in the Career Center. And I was also the liaison to the Student Veteran Center. And so I've worked in direct career services. I'm licensed as a counselor. You see some of those letters there under Wake Forest University. That's a licensed clinical mental health counselor, national certified counselor, and some other counseling related credentials. But since I have my license, I also work with Wounded Warrior Project as a provider. And so there are times where they have these Project Odysseys, and some of you may be aware of these. So Wounded Warrior Project has these Project Odysseys where you go on a retreat and you talk about aspects of mental health and well-being and all those kinds of things. And so I'm a mental health provider for the Wounded Warrior Project. And I'm also currently provide pro bono counseling for an organization in Winston-Salem called Veterans Helping Veterans Heal. So it's an organization that provides secure housing for veterans experiencing homelessness for 2 years. And within that 2 years, they get a lot of support around just general mental well-being, how to deal with kind of life circumstance stuff, transition stuff. And the reason why they do that is because their hope is that after they've been involved in the program, that they will likely be able to not return to the circumstance that brought them there. So that's the aim of the organization. And so I've been fortunate to provide career support, mental health support to residents and veterans, helping veterans heal. So that's a little bit of my experience now. In addition to those things, I've worked at one point with the Defense of Veterans Brain Injury Center in Charlottesville, Virginia, that supports veterans who are experiencing traumatic brain injury co-occurring with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I provided counseling services to that population. Now, I have not served myself. And so my interest in this topic came from connecting with a faculty member of mine in my graduate studies who was doing research. And I asked a little bit about, what kind of research are you doing? And he talked about female service members. And I got into it and I was hooked. And I was hooked in the sense that I realized that I needed to know more about how to help this population. Because as a civilian, there are a lot of things that I did not have awareness of. Now, I will never fully know what it is to serve, and I acknowledge that. And there are a lot of civilian providers like me out there that are going to be supporting military affiliated individuals. And I think it's important as civilian providers that we work to ensure that we do a good job. And one of the elements of that is having some degree of awareness of the experience of those who are serving and those who are connected to those who are serving. And so I've done a fair amount of research on these topics, have looked at career development, transitioning, military spouse employment, all those kinds of things. So I've tried to the degree I'm able to educate myself on the experience of those who have served, thinking about how it is I can best support them, both with career and mental health. Okay, so that's a little bit about me. Now, as we think about career and work and other terms related to employment and those kinds of things, there are a lot of things that are involved. And the reason why I point this out, I'm going to get into some of the pictures here in a minute, is because sometimes we view career as simply a surface level decision. But I would argue that career is a central feature of the human experience. That there's so much that goes into obtaining a career, maintaining a career, changing in a career. If you think about all the things that got you to Johns Hopkins, in terms of the decision to do that, all the things you've had to do to make that happen, I suspect it's involved discussions with family. I suspect it's involved financial considerations. And so there's so much that goes into work and career. And so I think to understand that is to recognize that with that reality, it's important that we think about it in the way that it really is playing out in our lives. And so my work, I think, as a counselor is to acknowledge that the complexity of one's career development requires a pretty in-depth response on the part of people like me. And so as you look at the pictures here, I'd like for you to just take a moment. You don't have to respond, but just take a moment and think about what your pictures would look like. What would you have on here? Because you see what I've selected, and I'll talk about the reason for my selecting these various things. But I'd like for you to think about what your pictures would look like. What would you put on here in terms of things that have impacted your career development?
I really want to be here. I don't want to come here and feel like I'm less done. I look like sheep, the guy, I guess, in wrong. Oh, God.
Okay, so I'm going to share a little bit about what I put on here. So if you see the picture of the family up in the upper, as I'm looking at it, the upper left-hand corner, that's the clan. That's the Hayden clan. And so certainly my family has impacted my career development. Me being at Wake Forest was related to my family, no question. And trying to figure out what's a good opportunity for me, what's a good opportunity for us, those kinds of things. So that's the reason why I picked that picture. Certainly the piggy bank is right next to it. You see the money that is going into it. It's financial considerations for sure. So there's a degree of um, trying to and see what that is going to mean in terms of financial resources, both to pursue a career and what that will provide me in terms of my own sustainment. Certainly, there's different degrees of ability. So you see the parking spot there, and so there's obviously there are people who have different degrees of capability within various things, and so that can be a consideration. The picture next to it, you see all the people who have some degree of distress. And so one of the things I really focus on in my research is the connection between career development and mental health. And so there's different variations of that, but I certainly think that that's very relevant. I think the glasses is kind of similar about, capability in various areas. The tricycle is related to kind of children specifically. So we've got the picture of my family, but developmentally, there's different things that are going on in terms of where your family may be if you are with children. And so there's some decision making might be different when they're at a particular age versus when they're older. You see the picture of the people with the masks on. So certainly events, the pandemic has radically shifted considerations of work. And so I think things like that can really impact career development, both at a societal level, but then also individually. And so I think that's one of the things that is important to note. And I think one of the things the pandemic has done is it has elevated our understanding of this connection between career and work and our own personal experience. So working from home versus working at an office, trying to adapt your work, people who are working in grocery stores being frontline workers at some point where that was not necessarily the case before then. And so I think things can shift quickly. And so I think the pandemic is an example, certainly, of that. Education seems to be related. It could be also training. So you see the diploma there, you can get certifications. So you can get education, which you all are doing as students at Johns Hopkins. So you'll get to wear your cap at some point, but other people, there's also an ongoing training and certification. Certainly work experience is a dimension of it, where you're located. I'm in North Carolina. So I would imagine there might be some different consideration of various career and work than if I was in Alaska. So I think your physical proximity to various opportunities and what is there can influence that. And then certainly things that have maybe people have bumped into in terms of legal concerns. And so that can consider that. And then the political climate, you see the voting, and then this kind of thought of opportunity and career. So these are some of my pictures. Again, keep in mind, what would your pictures look like? Because I think that's important. So just keep that in your mind here. Okay. So considering that this presentation is on military affiliated individuals, I think it's important to take a step back and think about what does that mean? Now, I realize that some of this data is specific to active duty families, but I also think that there's some consideration how this applies to veterans, and there's other dimensions of that. But the Blue Star families, if you have never seen this data, they do a tremendous job of these continually annual surveys on the experience of military families, military family lifestyle survey. And it's really, really interesting to see the results. And they do this annually, and it's got a huge sample size. And this one is 9,363 respondents. So this isn't 22 people saying what's going on. This is a large data set that is used to try and get insight into the experience of those who are serving and have served. And so I want to highlight a couple of things that were indicated. First of all, military spouse employment was indicated as one of the top 5 issues for active duty families in 2022. So as a person who focuses a lot on career development, that's really interesting to me, that's one of the top issues. And what can happen a lot of times, military spouse employment, is that people can be overtrained, overeducated for the available employment options. So I'll give a quick example. So I know somebody who is a PhD level counselor who is married to someone in the Army and is struggling to get licensed as a counselor because they've continually transitioned from one state to another state. And it's hard sometimes to build a career when you're continually transitioning. So she takes counselor adjacent jobs, jobs that are kind of like counseling, but she has been struggling to get licensed as a counselor, which then gives you the opportunity to practice independently. That's what it does in our world. If I get licensed as a counselor, I can open my own practice, don't have to be supervised, all those kinds of things. And those kinds of things are difficult for someone who's not licensed. But given all it takes to be licensed as a counselor, it's a lot of work, and you've got to get supervised hours and you've got to get a supervisor. So it's been a challenge. Now, there's a lot of work that's being done to change that, but that's just an interesting consideration that people who are not involved in military families simply don't have to think about as much. And so that's just an example of how that military spouse employment might come into play. And then you see these other things as well. But, transition elements, relocation, those kinds of things are very present. And then also the sense of belonging. So this is, I think, another layer to this military family survey that I really appreciate is kind of thinking about these families in civilian communities. And I think this also, it's been my experience that veterans can experience this as well. So when I was at the University of Virginia, the University of Virginia I would say is somewhat similar to Johns Hopkins, kind of a considered academic institution of reputation, academically oriented, those kinds of things. And I often wondered what this would be like for someone who's coming out of the service to come to this institution, because a lot of the students are 18 to 22-year-old students who have gone to high academically focused preparatory school for this experience. And so then you have someone who comes in who's had life experience apart from that, coming from the military. I just wondered, how would they connect? And certainly at Wake Forest, we have a little over 5,000 students. And so what would that be like to have that sense of belonging at Wake Forest when you have pretty similar profile to the University of Virginia, which would be 18 to 22-year-old students in doing that? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some resources around that, but I do want to acknowledge that potential sense of belonging, which can impact aspects of career. Because when we think about things that we do in career, like network, and we connect and we work with others who are doing similar things, it can impact one's capability in doing that. Okay, so I encourage you, Blue Star Families, if you're interested, you just Google it. Military Family Lifestyle Survey. It comes out every year, and it's something I'm literally looking for on my, I can't wait till it comes out. So I just kind of nerd out on some of this data because I think it's really interesting. Okay, so we did our own research. When I was at Florida State University, we did some research on what student veterans were indicating as their perceived career development needs, because we were trying to get a sense of what is it that we might want to ensure we provide them, and not just relying on what they would tell us, but also trying to inquire about, via some empirical evidence, what are the top things that they're looking for. And so we had a pretty good end. We had around 100 people respond, not huge a sample, but I think it's still informative. And these are the things that they indicated were most relevant to them in relation to career. So transferring skills gained in the military to the workplace, that was the most frequently thing indicated. Preparing a resume / CV or curriculum vitae, negotiating job offers, and then networking effectively. So those were the top 4. And you see there are other things on here as well. So really kind of, I think, to me, kind of interesting. And I think it's okay for us to take a moment to see if anybody would like to respond to this. So feel free to unmute if you have a comment or so related to this.
Hey Seth, thanks for sharing this. I think for transitioning military, items 2, 3, and 4 are something that's really difficult because we've never
Mm,
had to do that before in our
mm,
careers. We've never had to, our CV is on our chest, our job offer it comes from the detailer, and your
mm.
network is, the men and women next to you. So those are really hard for somebody to think I'm not going to succeed in the civilian world. I've never had to practice these skills. The number
Sure.
one, transferring skills, of course, right? You want to succeed at your first job outside the military. So you have to think, what do I do now well? And how can I make that value proposition to a civilian employer?
Sure.
But I think, yeah, 2, 3, and 4 are why it causes a lot of fear in transitioning military members.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And that's been my experience in working with them as well, because within the military, with the structure and how it's set up, it tends to provide a lot of these things inherently, given the framework. And so to have to do that apart from that can be difficult. And so that I agree. It's been my experience in working with military veterans who are trying to figure out aspects of career that these things often are indicated as difficult. Other folks, anyone else have any responses or thoughts?
Hey Seth, I would say I agree. 2, 3, and 4 are huge for me personally. The biggest arena that I've found has been not just transferring the skills that I gained in the Navy into a civilian workplace, but also understanding language, like alphabet soup, totally standard within the Navy.
Sure.
Had to understand and like be able to communicate through all of these different acronyms and things. But in my experience, a lot of the skills that I gained in the military don't translate because specifically those acronyms. And the biggest thing that it
Mm,
comes into is applying to jobs that have sort of inherent equality or like standards and requirements with the jobs that I did in the military. I scan through it and it's like, yeah, I theoretically understand how to do all of these tasks, but now I need to go make sure that my understanding of them actually jives with the language that's used in here,
sure.
and that the things that I have done equate to the requirements that you have for me, and that I can articulate that in a resume and a cover letter and also in an interview. And that's been something that I've just run across a whole bunch that's really frustrating.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, that's so you have all this experience, you've gained these skills, but how do you communicate that within the civilian world of work? Like that's challenging. And that's been a fair amount of my work that I've found as well, is trying to identify specific skills. And then how does that again connect with specific opportunities in general? How is it consumable for civilian hiring managers? I think is an important consideration. I do have some resources. I'm going to talk about a few things that are related to kind of how we're thinking about this, but I also have some very specific resources towards the end that hopefully is helpful with this in terms of that translation. And so I'm going to cover that as well. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. I appreciate it. And it's just something to keep in mind. Your list may look a little different, but I do think that it was illuminating to me. One other result that's not on here that I found really interesting, it was really surprising, to be frank, is we asked them what would be the preferred way of receiving career support. Would it be individual support, group support, or like a broader workshop? And I thought people were going to primarily endorse a broader workshop, but actually they overwhelmingly endorsed a group format, like smaller group engagement. So that was illuminating, and that's one of the reasons why we felt the need to do this, is to help us understand what are their needs as opposed to presuming we know what they are. And so that was very useful information. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a couple of career related theories. And the reason why I think this is useful is that we are we're going through a lot in relation to careers, and you're going through a lot in relation to your careers, and you're trying to navigate all these things. And so one of the questions I have is, how are you organizing this process? Because it can feel at times like it's really random. And there's just this happens, and then I might do this and I might do that. And so as somebody who provides career support, I try to have some kind of framework to organize this. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of different things that hopefully will be helpful to you. Again, directly connects with your experience. So if I was sitting with you in the Johns Hopkins Career Center, I would talk about these things with you. And so I'm going to do that tonight. And we'll see, the degree that it's useful, but my hope is that it is. So John Holland is a career theorist who did a lot of work on person-environment alignment. And that was his thing. And he put forward this idea that if you get a person who has various interests, values, and skills, and match them in an occupational environment where there's similar interests, values, and skills, then people are going to feel pretty good about what they're doing. And so he came up with this way of organizing it called Holland's Occupational Themes. And the reason why this is relevant is a couple of the resources I'm going to be directing you to are going to use these. And so I want you to know what they are. Okay, so you have these different, there's 6 of them, and it's a hexagon. So you've got realistic, which are the doers. You've got investigative, who are typically the thinkers, and you see additional information on here, but just as the tagline here, we'll go with that. Artistic, you're the creators. Social, you're the helpers. Enterprising, you're the persuaders. And then conventional, you're the organizers. So from this, what we do is that we try to get a sense of what are your top 3. And what we found in research is that people are pretty good at figuring out what are their top 2. So it's okay that the third one, the reason why the third one doesn't seem to come up as much, because the third and the fourth one aren't always clearly differentiated. But people seem to do pretty well at picking out their top 2, but we'll pick out 3 for the sake of our time. And so I want you to take a look at this. I'm going to give you a moment to absorb it. I'm going to have some additional information on this. But I'd like you to start to think about, don't do it yet because I got a little more information, but I'd like you to start to think about what 3 you would pick in terms of your interest, your values, and your skills. Okay? Primarily your interests. So think about that. Okay, give you a little more time again, looking for your top 3. What would you pick for yourself? Okay, so I'm going to have those descriptions again. And so we're going to do a game. We're going to do a party game. And we're going to have you all think about this. And it's going to be something that you're going to do individually, but just think about if we were all together. So think about which groups you would align with, but we're going to do this individually because obviously we're via Zoom and don't have the same kind of opportunity. But your friend has invited you to a party where you can go. You reluctantly agree to go. When you arrive, your friend leaves you to mingle. So based on that, where would you go? And so I have some additional information here, as you can see, around what I just talked about: realistic, investigative, social, artistic, enterprising, and conventional. So I'd like for you to think about where you would go first. And if we could, let me see if I can get the chat up here. If you feel so inclined, why don't you put your first letter in the chat? Because I'm just curious what, let's see what we got here. Do we have a lot of realistic folks? Do we have a lot of investigative? So if you would, just type the first letter of the one that you would go to first in terms of your own view. All right, so let's see what we got here. Got some R's, S, I. Okay. Okay, E, S. Okay, all right, so it looks like we got a pretty good mix. Got a pretty good mix of folks in terms of that. And so now I'd like for you in the chat to type in your second letter. So type in the chat your second letter, if you would, please. Okay, so I'm seeing a fair amount of R's and I's and C's in the first and second. Okay, interesting. Very good. And so again, we're going to leave it at the top two, but I think that's just really interesting to see that. Okay, so with that in mind, kind of building off this, so you went to your party and you went to your group, but now you get to plan a party. And you have a fair amount of resources. Then money is no object. Rarely in life is that the case, right? The money is no object. Be nice if that was the case, but often money is an object. But in this instance, that would not be the case. So I'd like for you to think about your first or second, whatever you prefer. And I'd like for you to go and respond to these questions here. So given that you might have an R, realistic, as your top letter, where would the party take place? When would the party take place? And you don't have to respond to all of these things, but just some general, like, where would this happen? What role would you play in the party? And if you have other people with you, like, what role would they play? How many people will you invite? And what will you have? What will be the theme? Be music, dancing, socializing, any, excuse me. Allergies, pardon me. I didn't have, it was so quick, I didn't have time to mute, so I apologize for that. And so I'd like for you to respond to these questions, and I'll give you, we'll see if 15 minutes, I might check in here in a little bit, but I feel like for you to kind of jot it down, you want to write it somewhere, feel free to do that. I'm going to mute, and I'll kind of give you some indicators of how we're doing on time. And then we're going to come back together, okay? So I'd like for you to answer these questions, keeping in mind your letters that you have indicated. Okay, thank you. I'm wondering if anyone is willing. Oh, thank you. I wonder if anyone is willing to share a little bit about your party. So who would like to share a little bit about what their party looks like?
Hey Seth, I'll share to kick it
Sure.
off. I would do a fondue party. Seems a trend that comes and goes every few decades, but a fondue
Sure.
party at my home in the evening. I'd be the host, provide the cheeses. I would ask participants to bring some of the dipping sides. 20 people, I think. Theme would be just the food itself and just some, nothing crazy on music or anything, some background music. But the activity would also be the socializing. It's a event and a dinner all in one.
Okay. So might I venture a guess that one of your letters is an S?
It was my first letter. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay. So I'd like to build off that for just a second. I'm going to ask other people to share if they're so willing. One of the things that's interesting is that our skills don't always align with our interests. So one of the things I've found sometimes is that you can take someone who's got an S and they might be good at a job that tends to not involve a lot of connection with other people. So maybe they're a data analyst or something like that, which, depends on the environment. The data analyst can actually be very engaging, but at times it can be somewhat isolating. And so from Holland's standpoint, if you take someone who has maybe that skill, but their interest doesn't align with that, they're not going to necessarily feel real good about what they're doing. So I'm just you said S and something came to mind. And so I just want you all to just think about that a little bit. That sounds like a great party. I would love to come to that party. So I love fondue, like being with other people. S is definitely, if you're a counselor, S is likely in your code. It's just kind of part of the deal. So not always, but often. S is often part of your code. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Anyone else like to share about their party?
Hello, Seth. Name's
Hello.
Hayden. I kind of went a different direction. I went more of a murder mystery game party.
Okay.
Kind of the number of people I'd like 15 to 20, but it depends on the game, of course.
Okay.
Like what role I'd be at the event. Definitely the host. I love hosting. Definitely have everyone bring their own food, charcuterie board night or something like that. Then I'd also think it would like evolve into something outdoorsy. So once the murder mystery is solved, I don't want the party to end. So I'd probably go and it's like, oh, let's do games outside, or there's a park down the street. It's kind of where I went with it.
Okay. Oh, that sounds awesome. So I'm gonna guess that there's an I in your code.
Yep, that was my first.
Okay. All right, good. Because murder mystery, so you're solving something, but I'll go, and I could be wrong on this. But I would say like there's an R in your code too.
That was my second. Yep.
Okay. All right, good. Because you talked about being outdoors and kind of hands-on kind of things. So yeah, so I think that's really interesting. And again, with these interests, the thing to keep in mind is, are the things I'm looking at aligned with this? Are they going to give me opportunities to explore these interests? Now, one of the things I try to caution people about is to think that one job's going to give it all to you. So that can be challenging sometimes. And to think that you're going to find one occupation, one position that's going to allow you to do all of that. But if that's not happening within your work, how else is it happening? So maybe you're involved in some kind of clubs or social networks or those kinds of things that allow you to do the thing that maybe your job isn't allowing you to do. Okay, so keep these things in mind, because some of the resources I'm going to share at the end are going to build off this, because there's something called ONET, and there's other things as well that focus on these occupational themes. So keep in mind the hexagon, RIASEC, all of that as we move forward. Okay, thank you all for that. Sounds like great parties. I'm sure you all, others have great parties as well. So maybe you all can connect and after, and you can have your fondue murder mystery party at some point, because it sounds really interesting. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving along here. So as we're thinking about the different skills that are related to navigating career decision making, there's a theory called cognitive information processing, and I promise you I'm not going to get too far into the weeds on this. Okay, it sounds like a $10 word, but I'm going to try to break it down to where it's pretty understandable, okay, and how it's relevant to you. So essentially with cognitive information processing, it's about how do I develop skills in terms of making career decisions and career problem solving. Because regardless of the career concern, whatever you all are experiencing, there are skills involved with that. Okay, and so a couple of things you see here, this is a pyramid. So this is essentially like the kind of content areas of our skills. So there's knowing about yourself, you see on the bottom of the pyramid. There's knowing about your options. There's knowing how you make decisions. And then there are the thoughts and feelings that are associated with making decisions. Okay, so these are various skills. And when I'm working with people from this standpoint, I'm actually going to pull out the pyramid, because it's really interesting to hear people share their story and how these different things fit in various areas. And it helps us identify which direction do we want to go. So do people, in terms of their interest, value, skills, do they have a lot of awareness of that? That's knowing about myself or self-knowledge. Do they know about what options are out there? And if not, maybe that's where we need to focus our work. How we go about making decisions. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. Some people like to talk to a lot of people and talk to family. Some people just like to go ahead and make the decision on their own. Some people like to collect a lot of information. And so there's a lot of different elements to decision making. And then there's this thought about thinking about my decision making. Do I have a strong belief that I'm going to be successful? Do I have a lot of doubt? Do I have a lot of anxiety? Those kinds of things. So this pyramid can help us identify aspects of one's skills in relation to career decision making. And then in relation to that, there is, how do I navigate a career decision? So one of the things that happens with career is you got to make a choice. You chose to go to Johns Hopkins. I imagine you had other options. So at some point, you had to determine Johns Hopkins is the place I want to go. And so that's a choice. That's the top here, the communication, knowing I need to make a choice. Whether during your time at Johns Hopkins or beyond your time at Johns Hopkins, you're going to have to make other choices. I mean, one's career really spans their life. Once you get into an age of working and you start to do that, that continues for a long period of time. And so those decisions, I think, continually come up, and this helps us understand, how do we go about making those decisions? So you'll see some of these things are connected with the pyramid that I just displayed. You'll see some similar language. So first of all, you got to need to make a choice. You got to understand yourself and your options. So that's the analysis you see there. I've got to expand my options, and then I've got to narrow it, because again, at some point I'm going to have to do something specific. So maybe you thought about a lot of different universities before you got to Johns Hopkins. And then you had to start to narrow that list. Like, okay, I can't go everywhere. I got to go to one place. And so I'm going to start to narrow that. And then you have to think about choosing, but also with the sense of valuing. And then you got to do it. That's the execution. You got to implement your choice. Now, one of the challenges that people have is, it'd be nice if you could see the outcome before you made the choice. That's just not how it works. So when I came to Wake Forest, that felt like the best choice, but I wasn't going to know if it was a good choice until I got here. And so that can bring up a lot of stuff for people. That can be an anxiety-provoking experience to have all these different things to think about and then determine, okay, I'm going to do this. But I hear some language sometimes about the right choice. Did I make the right choice? I don't know. That's hard to know. I don't know if you all have seen those Back to the Future movies. I'm sure I'm dating myself. This is such a like dated cultural reference. So just bear with me. I'm a little older. So these Back to the Future movies, when Michael J. Fox was an actor, and so the thought is that he goes to different timelines, and things happen to change the timeline. And so it's kind of like this. It's like it'd be interesting to see if I made a different choice, what would my life look like going forward? But I can't do that. That doesn't. I don't have a time machine. And so again, it can be difficult. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do when you're implementing a choice is to pay attention to how you're thinking and feeling about it. Like, don't be dismissive of that. It can be anxiety provoking, it can bring up all kinds of stuff, it can be difficult to think through. And so hopefully you can access competent professionals such as you see, or others as well, who are here to support you as you're trying to navigate this, because it can be difficult, and I want to acknowledge that. Deciding if you're going to stay in the military, if you're going to transition out, deciding what you're going to do after Johns Hopkins. I mean, all those things. Those are high stakes decisions. Those aren't small things. And so it's natural to have some reactions to that. Okay. And so I'm wondering if anybody likes cooking shows. You see her, do you like cooking shows? No?
Sorry, I can't search what something is about, but I can search by title, actors or directors, and categories like horror or action.
I'm not sure why my Siri just went on. So all I did
You
was
said
talk.
you said Yasir, and I believe the Siri is like, oh, that's
Oh,
me.
gotcha. Sorry about that.
No,
All right.
not yeah. Cooking show is not for me, but my
Okay,
wife loves
all right.
it. So.
Yeah, I don't like them either. I don't like them either because they make it look so easy, right? I mean, it's just like, oh, I'm just gonna whip this up. You know, we got young children, the Hayden family. It's like if it's more than 2 ingredients, that's just too much. So, but this analogy, the reason why I bring this together is that in thinking about career decisions, it's really like a recipe, right? And so you've got the things in the pyramid, which are the ingredients. Those are the knowing about yourself, knowing about your options. How do you make decisions and how you're thinking and feeling about it? And then you have the steps, which is the cycle that I just showed you. So you put those things together, and that is a career decision. And so think about your own pyramid. What does your pyramid look like? How do you implement these steps? How do you go about making a decision? And is that effective for you? Is that helpful to you in how you do it? Is there something you wish was different about it? And so I think there's some things to consider in terms of how it is you go about making career decisions and how you solve those kinds of problems. Okay. Now, one of the things that I often do with people, and I'm going to actually have a link to a blank one of these for you all, and I'll show you where that is it's an individual learning plan. And the reason why I draw your attention to this is that it seems sometimes that people just do things because other people are doing it. And so it's not necessarily as strategic and aligned with their goals as it could be. So sometimes people will look online for information on various occupations. Sometimes people will do practicing of interviews because that seems like something to do. And the question I have is, how is this connected directly to your goals that you have for yourself? And so the individual learning plan can be helpful in organizing the process. And in addition to the goals, what are you going to do first? So the prioritization of those tasks can be difficult because sometimes it's like, well, do I do it all at once? Like, what's the next thing I do? So the individual learning plan provides a way to capture the things you feel need to be done. Think about, again, what are the goals that I have for myself in relation to career? What activities am I going to do? Why am I doing them? Like, what's the purpose of this? And hopefully you can articulate that. And if not, that invites other considerations, like, should you be doing it? And then how much it's going to take, and then what goals it align with. And then again, what's the first thing you're going to do? What's the second thing? What's the third thing? So on. Okay. And so you see some examples on here. And some of these are assessments. So complete the self-directed search. It's a Holland-based assessment, the career thoughts inventory, gets at thoughts and feelings, negative career beliefs. So I'm just giving you a little context for what those things are. But you see other things here as well. Explore potential graduate degree programs of interest. And so you see here how this can come together. And so again, I will have a link for you within the presentation to where you can explore those things. Okay. All right, so let's go to that. All right, so let me pull up. Okay, so you see here, this is an individual learning plan. Are you seeing the internet? You see, or can you give me a
No, we still see the PowerPoint.
I'm sorry, it did the Siri thing again. So let me stop the share my screen, make sure I'm showing you the thing I'd like to show you.
I don't have an answer for that. Is there something else I can help with?
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
All right. Desktop. Okay, so hopefully, let me pull this up. Do you see it now? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, so I'm going to put this in the chat for you. It's also in the presentation, which I'm happy to provide for you all to have access to. But this is the link here. And you can fill this out. And so you see what it is. So what are the goals that you have for yourself related to career? What activities are you going to do to engage in that? And then again, think about some things that you're trying to navigate and how is it related? So this is the individual career learning plan. I think there's some value to this because, again, it's not always like put together in terms of the different things that we're involved in. Okay. I know I said I'd have questions at the end, but I would like to just provide an opportunity to see, because this is something that's here in front of us. Does anybody have any questions related to this? Feel free to unmute if you have a question about this. Okay. And so additional things that I think are useful is the VA has this, and I'll put this in the chat as well. VA has veteran readiness and employment. I'm sure many of you already are aware of this, but I feel it's important to just put this forward as specific VA resources for you in relation to readiness and employment. Hopefully you found them helpful. And again, there's a lot of resources, I think, devoted to aspects of career, certainly educational elements as well. And so my hope is that you're utilizing them and that you find them helpful in doing that. Okay, so just something to just keep in mind that I just, again, wanted to direct your attention to it. Okay, so I'm going to share this as well. So this is a resource for you that I'll do something real quick here. So if I wanted to do doctor, you'll see here that this connects me with different information in relation to that. But if I wanted to go here to military, if I typed in Army, and then I'll just do their example, radio operator. So you see here, this is connected to a large, massive database. I mean, a massive database. ONET is very reputable. It's a governmental resource that has tons of occupational information. So I'm going to walk back. So I typed in here, I indicated Army, typed in radio operator, boom, clicks me to some options that seem to be related to that. Okay, and let me click on broadcast technician. So you see here that it tells me a little bit about the knowledge, the skills that are related to that, abilities that are connected to that. They have a video here if you wanted to look at that, education that will be needed, and direct links to training, job outlook. So it gives you a little bit of a sense. It says here, this is below average in terms of your job outlook. Maybe broadcast technician, things are evolving in terms of media, so maybe that's contributed to that. I don't know. But there are some that would likely be different. So if we come back here, if I click on telecommunications equipment installer and repairer, it's got the little sunshine right here. So you see, you get a similar thing, but the job outlook is bright. So that's what that little sunshine means that you'll see within this. Okay, so this is a reputable database that you can input your role, various branches of the military. You can input that information and it will take you to at least some idea of civilian equivalents of that role. Okay, so hopefully you find that helpful. And I believe I put it in the chat. So you should have direct access to that. And the links are also within the presentation. So when I when this is distributed, however that happens, the links are in there as well. Okay, as I indicated, I have done work with the Wounded Warrior Project. And so I want to indicate that they have resources around employment as well. So you may qualify post 9/11 injury for involvement in the Wounded Warrior Project. And they have employment resources as well. So career transition and development for America's injured veterans. And so you see that they have a fair amount of resources here, financial education, other things as well that are available to you. So if this is something that would be of interest to you, again, I did want to indicate that that is something there for you. Okay. At Johns Hopkins, there are some resources specifically for you all. Now, it might feel like a duh experience, but there's often been times when I work with students at universities who are not fully aware. Hello. Sorry, it's a little game our children play. Let's interrupt Daddy's work meeting. Okay. So yeah, it's just interesting to me. A lot of times when I talk with people who are student veterans, that they just don't have full awareness of the resources within the institution that they are attending. And so I just think it's important to point this out. And I'm sure all of you are fully aware of this, utilize it to its full extent. But just in case, here you go. This is that information related to that. I encourage you to utilize it. I did a little scan of it earlier today. I think it's got some pretty good stuff. Some pretty good stuff here that's directly related to your experience. And you see here, it's got some drop-down stuff for you to click on. Got alumni elements here. So yeah, encourage you to take a look at that. And there's obviously some people that would be good to know who they are. So reach out and just start to connect. And it doesn't always have to be when something is pressing. It can also be just to familiarize yourself with the resources. Okay. All right. So Hire Heroes USA is another resource for you that really focuses on job seekers and how do we connect them with opportunities. And so I do think that that's something to keep an eye on. You see here they have various events. It's directly related to employment. And it says here, transitioning from the military to civilian life can be a monumental challenge. To find meaningful and lasting careers, the military community deserves our best. So obviously this seems pretty relevant to what we've been talking about. Now I'm going to do look up one more thing that I thought I had drawn attention to. So the my next move is kind of related to this, but this is also, let me put this in the chat. And I think I need to put a couple other things in the chat as well. So let me put this in first, talk about this, and then I'll go back and look to make sure I've got the other things in there. Okay, so this is similar to the My Next Move, but it's directly through ONET. So similar kind of thing. So Air Force, so if I were to do airfield operations in the Air Force and I click go, it would tell me about these various, I might specifically indicate a title, and it gives me a drop down of specific things that I can look at. And again, similar, you got your sunshine, bright outlook. You click on this, it's going to have a little different interface, but a lot of similar information here about tasks, skills, activities, training credentials, and you can do a search to find if they've got what you need in your specific state, various skills, abilities. I mean, it's a lot of information. So career advisors, career counselors, career coaches can be helpful as you're trying to navigate this information. But again, this is similar to My Next Move, but I think has a little different interface and it seems like some more expanded information. Okay, that's ONET, the military crosswalk. ONET, military crosswalk. Okay, and then I think this is I'm going to make sure I put this in, which is the JHU specific resources. And not sure if I put the Hire Our Heroes in there, but I'll do it again just in case. Okay, so hopefully as you're clicking on these, you got lots of tabs on your computer. And these are things that you can use, because that is my hope, is that you have very specific resources that can be useful. Now, I also want you to keep in mind the things we talked about before we got to these specific resources, such as the Holland Code, such as the pyramid, such as the cycle, because one of the things that has been indicated is that people who get positions right out of the military after a year of being in that position aren't necessarily satisfied with their position. So sometimes when we talk about veterans employment, and I think this goes also for people who are affiliated with the military, there's a lot of focus on get them employed. And I think that's absolutely valuable. That's absolutely important. And there's more to it than that. Because if you're in a position, but yet it's not aligned with some of the things we talked about, and you haven't thought about your interests, values, skills, you haven't had the opportunity to have a deliberative process of examining that, haven't looked at self-knowledge, options knowledge, how do you make decisions, and kind of put those pieces together, you might find yourself in something that's not aligned with who you are. And so I think it's important. And I'm not one to say that, your job has to provide the most deepest meaning in your life. I understand getting a job oftentimes is I got to sustain myself. So there's nothing wrong with that. I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of things that go into this. And so it's useful to pay attention to those other things as you're navigating all of this information that I've showed you, which is a lot. It's a ton of information. And you're going to have people who are going to tell you things as well. You can do this, you can do that. And so it's a lot to process. It's a lot to go through. So how are you organizing it? The individual learning plan is one way to do it. Again, the Holland Party game is another activity you can put in play. So think about using those things in addition to these specific direct resources around employment opportunities and so on. Okay, so keep those things. Hopefully you can integrate these elements. And if it's not easy to do, which is understandable because it's a big thing to have to consider, reach out for support, whether within the VA whether at Johns Hopkins, I've told you there's some people that you can talk to. You can talk to others as well who can help you. I encourage you to utilize those resources. Okay, so I just have a little bit more, and I want to open it up because I have some. I'm just going to direct you a little bit to. Am I still online here? Let me make sure. I don't think I'm sharing anymore. So let me share again. All right, so hopefully you see the PowerPoint. Okay, so you'll see the links here are what I've already talked about, but I just want to highlight that they're also in the presentation. So you can access those things here as well. And then additional things, there's a YouTube video on the 5 tracks in the Veterans Readiness and Employment Program. So I just thought that might be useful. I believe that's correct. I'll check that link. But I'll correct, just make sure all these things are what we need them to be. Okay. All right. So questions. I'd like to hear about your impressions. Please feel free to unmute. I can also check the chat. Let me see if I can do that. So I'd like to get a sense of, we've talked about a lot. We've covered a lot of ground on this Thursday evening. And so I want to get a sense of your thoughts, questions, anything related to what we've discussed. Well, thank you, Neil. I appreciate it. Glad that the resources are helpful. Okay, what about others?
Yeah, Seth, I would echo some of Neil's comments. There's so many resources out there for vets, and frequently I find that myself or my friends don't know about them. So I'm glad you included that in this presentation. I thought that the exercise, kind of categorizing us according to Holland's buckets was really interesting and helped me better understand myself. So that was fun. And overall, just able to kind of chart that path towards making that transition, and the tools to do so are helpful. So thanks for including this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, what about others? Any questions or thoughts? Yes, Siri, anything, and I'm sure that I don't think Siri went off. And now it's probably going to go off because I just said it. Is there any other questions you have or any other additional thoughts you would like for me to provide? I just want to see if I want to check in with you to see if there's anything that comes to mind for you.
No, I loved it. I learned a lot as well. I mean, I've been using On It Online for a while, but just being honest, I didn't know that part with the On It Online.
Sure.
So that's pretty helpful. I didn't know some of the resources you shared as well. So I've learned a lot. Definitely, we're gonna be sharing these resources, not just the students register for the session, but also like all of the students pretty much. I'm gonna be sending your PowerPoint to them. So no question on my end.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. It seems like people are expressing appreciation. Glad I could be of assistance. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all. And so hopefully if you come down to Winston-Salem and you get a Krispy Kreme donut and a pack of smokes, I'm not encouraging you to smoke. So don't, big disclaimer there. But if you come to Wake Forest, it's Seth Hayden. Let me put my email in the chat. I encourage you to use resources, certainly at Johns Hopkins, but also, stay connected. If there's something you'd like to share, or if you have a question, something I can do to be of assistance.